Simon, it's been really nice getting to know you over the last year, but it's been in pretty horrendous circumstances. Do you want to tell us a bit about what the last few months have been like?
Horrendous, probably the word I'd use, but they have got a bit easier. I think with grief and losing someone, people often say time's a great healer. I don't actually agree with that. I think time changes things. It just becomes bit by bit a little bit easier, but it's hard because a year ago Gemma was fit and healthy, or we thought she was. Start of November 2017, she was fine. She'd broken a metatarsal, just tripped up the pavement. I don't know how you trip up a pavement, but she tripped up a pavement taking Ethan to school. But she was fine. And literally 3.5 weeks after breaking her foot, and I'm not relating the two, but at the time when she appeared healthy, and I can see the photo of her now with her big black boot on, she looked a picture of health. 3.5 weeks later, she's gone. It was that quick.
So take us through sort of when did you first realise something might be wrong?
Early November, and it was difficult trying to pick up on what was actually happening because Gemma had had insomnia for about 8 years. Ever since she had Ethan, she would have periods where she would regularly not sleep at all, but somehow had this ability to kind of carry on. But women are just much better at this stuff than blokes are, to be honest. But this time the fatigue was much more pronounced. She started to struggle sort of to get up and do the normal things in the day. And I remember hearing actually after she went from a friend who'd been shopping with her and said that she had had to sit down and found it almost too much to walk back from the shopping centre to the car park. So the signs were there. And then coupled with that, these headaches had just gone on for a while. But again, because I was ill at the time with depression and anxiety, there was that sense in which perhaps she was stressed about me, which she definitely was. And when we went to the doctor those 3 times, the first time, well, he's just going on what we're telling him. She's got headaches, she's feeling really tired, but she'd been to see him loads of times about her insomnia. But it wasn't until literally the penultimate weekend in November, and she, by this point, is in bed. The headaches are just not going. She is finding it physically exhausting walking from the bed just into the ensuite bathroom, which was next door. She's not eating. All the signs were there. Our problem is that we were ignorant as to what the symptoms of blood cancer were. Yeah. And I look back at it now, and when I've written about it in the book, I can see it screaming out at me. Look, here are all these signs. But even her doctor, we had 3 visits. The one on the Wednesday, we saw a different doctor on the Friday, and then we saw our doctor again on the Monday. Now, I wasn't in that appointment, regrettably, but I do find it hard to understand how he didn't see just how much she'd gone downhill. But this is where we need to help doctors to pick up more on the symptoms of blood cancer, because they can be varied, they can be general. They're not acute symptoms that you might get with another kind of cancer, say bladder cancer. Going to your doctor, I've got blood in my urine. That's a big sign that something potentially is wrong. With blood cancer, sometimes it can be quite general, and it was with Gemma. But then, she goes downhill very quickly. We're in Reading Hospital on the Monday night. By the Tuesday, we've been transferred to the Churchill Hospital, to the haematology ward in Oxford. We're just utterly amazing. Dr. Annie Pennickett was her consultant. By the end of that Tuesday, she's diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. I'd never heard of it. Never heard of acute. I've heard of acute kind of leukemias, but not myeloid. And by the Friday, she'd gone because the damage that had been done over those days, and actually those 2 or 3 weeks that she'd had it, when we didn't know what was going on, the damage was happening to the blood vessels in her brain, because her blood had become so thick with this explosion of white blood cells. So I think the normal count's somewhere between 5 and 10 in a healthy adult. Hers was nearly 400 when they tested her blood in Reading that night. And so the damage that would eventually, take her life on the Friday, which was, an intracerebral hemorrhage, that's what actually killed her. But it was the damage of that blood being so thick that meant it was too late for her. And I just look back and think, I wish to God we'd been more aware of the symptoms. It may or may not have saved her, but it'd given us a chance, and we didn't have that.
And you've done a huge amount since then to help raise symptoms. So you're not the only one, and half the adult population can't name a single blood cancer symptom. You've talked openly about the symptoms. You've made a huge difference. What's that experience been like in terms of opening up to the world about what's been happening? And
in some ways, it's hard because you're doing it out of a story of tragedy. You're not telling the story of, look, this is why you've got to find out about these symptoms because we did, and look what happened, Gemma's still here. There is a sadness to it, but it's kind of bringing something good out of a horrible situation, and that gives you a reason to live again, just generally, you know, finding those shards of light, whatever you want to call it, in amidst a really horrible situation. And I want part of her legacy, and to make a little bit of sense out of what's happened, to be about helping others and to try and help others not end up going down the route that Gemma did, as in being ignorant. And so seeing a partner, a husband, a wife, a child, or whoever it might be, displaying the kind of symptoms that Gemma had, but sitting there in a place of complete ignorance and going, well, you know, so it's nothing to worry about. Yeah. Do you know what? It probably isn't. For most people, it probably isn't anything to worry about. But I want their story to be one where they go to the doctor and they push them harder than we did, and actually don't take no for an answer and say, I want a blood test. Yeah. And really push for that. And so, yeah, it's bringing something good out of something really horrible. And I know that she'd be incredibly, well, I think she'd be kind of perplexed as to why her stories had such a kind of effect. But for me, it makes my heart glad, because it's bringing something good out of the wreckage of that November.
So family life now totally unrecognisable from a year ago, I guess.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, I just look at blood cancer and think, you know, this is why don't hang around, get help, you know, find out what's wrong. Because when this happens, and it happens so fast, the best way to describe it was like a bomb going off. And just everything, as we began to kind of pick ourselves up as the weeks went on from the kind of wreckage that wreaked, you know, not just for Ethan and I, but for Gemma's family, my family and friends and everything. You know, the shockwaves went out a long way. And as you begin to kind of stand up again and try and live life again, everything looks different. It is like a bomb's gone off, and there are things you recognise, but the landscape looks totally different. And, you know, home life is radically different now. I mean, there's lots of similarities, but, you know, just seeing Ethan traversing life without his mum, you know, it's just, that's the hardest part of this journey is you want to fix that. You want him to have a mum, and he's been robbed of his mum by one of the most brutal blood cancers out there. And I don't want others to ever have to experience this and see their kids grow up without a mum or a dad, because it's just, it's horrible. And I think there was for quite a long time, just as my counsellor would say, because it was so quick and so brutal, it was effectively like you've been in a car crash, and for the first few months you can barely take yourself out of the car crash. But over time you kind of learn to live again, and you begin to find joy again in certain areas, and learn to laugh again and smile again. But the sadness of her absence, you can never escape that. And life's just, everything's different. My career's changed, not doing what I used to do. And I think that's the biggest thing I'd say out of all of this, is that, you know, with AML, time wasn't on our side. And I don't know whether things would have been different, but it's just the wreckage something like this can cause. We have to change the number of people. I know loads of people are cured, but it needs to change, particularly when it comes to AML. It's got to change, because I don't want anyone to have to go through this at this time in life. We know death is going to come at some stage, of course it is. But when it comes at this stage in life, it's just a very different thing.
Yeah, no notice. And those of us who've been following your story, the relationship between you and Ethan seems like it's stronger than it's ever been. And is that right? Is it, what's in that dynamic? Yeah,
when you look at reasons to live again, reasons to enjoy life again, he's the single biggest factor in that, because he has been remarkable in how he's dealt with it. You know, there are times where I wonder what's going on in his head, but I think the really important thing for me right from the start was to keep Gemma part of the conversation, to keep talking about mummy, to give him permission to talk about her, because I know it can be easy for parents to shut down, and it's too painful to go there, so they shut the door. But I always want that door to be open, that he could talk about her. And he's just, I think when kids go through this, sadly, they have to grow up a bit quicker than normal. Yeah, he's still a kid at heart, but I think his emotional literacy is way beyond that of the kids in his class, because, and he wish it wasn't that case, but out of this, he's just become incredibly wise. I mean, he comes up to me when if I'm getting stressed, I say, "You're not getting stressed, are you, Daddy? Please don't get," you know, he looks after me, you know, when I'm also looking after him. I can honestly say, without him, I'm not sure how I could have got through this. He's the reason I get up every morning, and the reason you sort of smile again. And I see so much of mum in him, and so that's just yeah, amazing. Just seeing that. She does live on.
Tell me about when you first heard of Bloodwise. When was that?
I think the first time I became really aware of it, I'd heard of Bloodwise before. Didn't know fully what you guys did. I knew enough to know that you were obviously connected with blood cancer. I didn't know that. I think it wasn't until actually that week in the Churchill Hospital in Oxford, because as part of their care for Gemma, they brought, through a whole number of booklets on both blood cancer and in particular acute myeloid leukemia. I have to say now, I'm quite glad I didn't read them that week, because I know that Gemma's sister did read on the Tuesday that she got diagnosed some of the stats on acute myeloid leukemia. Yeah. And, this is what we're trying to, you guys, and hopefully I can help you in whatever way possible to change this. But, the number of people who survive beyond 5 years with AML, even if Gemma had got through that week and the next few months, her chances of living much beyond 5 years are really small.
Yeah.
Really small.
15%.
15% is just, it's horrendous. Yeah. And that can change. It can change. Mm-hmm. I now know it can change. And that's the first time I became aware of Bloodwise, was just eventually reading those booklets, and I still got them at home, and seeing Bloodwise on there. And then as the weeks went on, through speaking to you guys and the stuff that happened when I did those interviews back in February, realising just, it's a huge, it covers so many things. I think that's maybe why people in their heads struggle to kind of really know what blood cancer is all about, because if you say lung cancer or breast cancer or prostate cancer, people are just going to an area of the body, they get it. I think most women now thankfully get that it's important to examine yourself, and if you do feel a lump, go and get it checked out. That narrative's changed massively over the last few years, and it needs to change for blood cancer. Yeah. It needs to change, but I think because there's so many different kinds, and the symptoms can be so varied, and sometimes very general things that we would feel in everyday life, that it's a more difficult thing for people to get their heads around, but they have to get their heads around it.
So what's your hope over the next few years?
One of my big hopes, and I saw that changing on that day I did the Twitter takeover as part of that awareness month throughout September, was seeing kind of people waking up to the fact that actually they were totally ignorant about blood cancer, as were we. Back in November 2017, we were ignorant about blood cancer. And I want that narrative to change. I want people to understand more, not to become paranoid, but just to know the kind of things to look out for when it comes. So I want to end the ignorance. For over half the UK population not to be able to name one symptom, let alone all the others, it has to change. Because when that changes, lives will get saved. And I want to do all I can in terms of raising money, particularly in the area of acute myeloid leukemia, so that 15% of people living beyond 5 years changes dramatically. And I think back on what Sir Ian Botham has done, particularly I remember those walks all those years ago, just being totally inspired by this guy who just walked, and a bit like Forrest Gump ran in the film, Beefy just walked and kept walking. But as you guys know, the way that changed, both the perception of blood cancer, but also actually the reality of blood cancer for people, and the number of people who are now around today because of the money he raised that got invested into changing those stats. And so people were surviving more and more, is incredible. And if I can do a quarter of what he did, then I'll be happy.
What would you say to anyone who's watching this who's worried themselves? What would your advice be to them?
Just don't delay, because I think in life with anything, when it's something we're a bit unsure of and it's maybe a pain or a symptom that is unusual, I do think a lot of us, we do have that little fear of going to the doctors, because ignorance is bliss, and if I don't know what it is, I don't have to worry. Yeah. Don't let fear stop you going to the doctor. Understand that with blood cancer symptoms, more often than not, it'll be nothing to worry about. But just go and find out if it maybe is something to worry about. And I'd say this to everybody, if you feel, and listen, I don't want to put doctors in a bad light. Doctors are busy, they're under pressure, they're under time pressures, they're under money pressures as well. If you feel that your doctor is not really understanding what you're telling him, if you feel that he's not recognising actually this concern you have is a serious one, then push. Yeah. And push for that blood test, and don't take no for an answer. And that's what I would say is if you're worried, get an answer. Don't just be satisfied with, come back on Monday, because with Gemma, time was everything. With acute myeloid leukemia, for us, time, and it is with all cancers, but particularly this one, because it's called acute because it develops so rapidly. You do not have time on your side. And I don't know to this day, on that first Wednesday, 10 days before she went, she'd ended up being taken for a blood test. They'd have discovered right there and then she had leukaemia. Might it have been a different end to the story? We will never know. But I would just say to people, you know, to give yourself the best chance, don't hang around. It'll probably be okay.
Ask for the blood test.
Just get that blood test done.